Yes, Aviva alumni. And what I want to start this off with is just to say how full circle this is for me, because I used to organize these women in leadership sessions for around 2 years with Clau Bermudez. So I knew at some point I always wanted to be the guest speaker. So it's so crazy and so special for me to be back here doing this. One of the hardest things just in a way forgetting your EA role, in the sense that you have to let go of your executive. You have to let go of where, like, managing his calendar, his email, just kind of trying to be that partner for your executive. He now has a new partner, which is Noel, and he has been doing an outstanding job so that I could fully focus on my role. So it's more like separating you. At first, you're like a glue to your executive. Everything you're doing is so ingrained, and you're helping your executive so much. Whereas as a chief of staff, you now have to regain your focus to your direct reports, if you have them, to your projects, to your goals, which of course have to be aligned. But yes, you have to get to know him in a new way. Um, I would say, in terms of knowing your executive, there's a lot of that you can do in the meantime while you're still an EA. So that's part of the challenge, but it's also letting go of that part and not worrying about any of his stuff to a certain point. It sounds bad, but the whole point is just understanding that you're not separating the role, both for the success of your role and just for the success of your EA as well. I think that was very important, just kind of like creating that separation and creating structure around what was going to be my new role. This is going to sound as a cliche, but I mean it by heart, and it is be a sponge. Go to every meeting, every session, every learning and growth, every wellness, every town hall, and just absorb everything. Again, you have so much resources at your disposal, and follow that, or like begin that with a self-assessment. So as you start learning, you will realize that there's a lot you don't know. So start creating from the get-go the list of your gaps. What do you want to understand? What are the things you want to learn? And within Viva, with your resources, with your learning slash wellness budget, there's so much that you can do. And start kind of feeling what's driving your curiosity. So are you feeling more drawn to a particular area? This particular business, is AI really calling your name? Well, you should be all AI forward, but generally be a sponge. This is the best moment and the best place to learn, and just be an amazing executive support professional. Well, I was, first of all, heads down when I was at Viva. Like, I was doing everything. I wanted to be in every single department. So from that end, I think it was that I had a CSL, like I was a CSL also from like a very good place and time. Being a CSL exposes you to like a lot of leadership challenges and a bunch of stuff. But I would say personally, something a lot of us struggle with, especially women, is there's a lot of imposter syndrome. And the level of mismatch that I had between what I was doing and how I felt about it and how I felt about myself was a ginormous gap. Like, I can't even tell you. And there were so many times where I was speaking to Clau or speaking to Adnan, and Clau would say something like, you gotta believe it too. Like, you have to do your own self-assessment and say at the end of the day, no matter the recognition that I get, I know I'm doing an amazing job. I know I'm doing this and this and this right. And that was the hardest part for me to learn. Not anything technical, not anything developmental, just kind of sitting in a place of confidence. Because that then created a bond with my executive that allowed me to evolve. So when I felt like I was in a place to give him feedback, which was, I kept getting encouraged by Adnan, like, have you tried giving your executive feedback? And I was like, oh no, I am not doing that. And at first, just the mere idea of that would just give me chills, until we started giving each other feedback. And I remember, I will never forget this, because I think he's slightly traumatized by it. We were, I think, in a board meeting or in all hands, and we had a chat afterwards. And he said, how do you think the meeting went? Like, how did I do? And I was like, bro, you could use some work on your public speaking skills. Like, obviously not in that sense, but that was my immediate reaction. I was like, yo, you're a CEO. Let's work on this. And that for him was so eye-opening to have someone And he told me to find someone to be like his strategic thought partner. And he said, I have people that I pay for. Like, we have coaches, I have stuff. No one has ever said this to me. But I couldn't do that until I felt confident enough to do it. And knowing and trusting my abilities, my point of view, my knowledge, that I had something to teach or to provide or to coach to my executive, and executives plural, the rest of the leadership team. So I have to say that's like the biggest part for me. It's not just that one moment. It's something you start to create like little by little by little. And I can tell you there are moments where I still kind of feel differently, and I kind of have to like lift myself back up. But for the most part, I think it's a repetition, and it's kind of when you're creating new habits, and you have to kind of see how you felt after doing that. So of course, something I'm not going to be, and something I can't ignore is that I know maybe not all executives are going to be as receptive to feedback, things like that in the example that I gave. But something that made me feel very confident was just learning a lot. Because like it's not the same if I'm giving you like feedback. It's like I'm giving you feedback based on all this research. And that became so special. So the more I learned about things, the more I felt ready to say, hey, maybe we should do things differently. Or maybe you should speak better. Like, please focus on the camera, the tips that we get at Viva, like body language, stuff like that. But I think it's just step by step, just pushing yourself further, assessing how you feel. And also, when you understand your gaps and you leverage those gaps and make them strengths, then now I can say, oh, this might have been like a blind spot for me, but now I can say this with a full understanding of XYZ. So knowledge, and also little by little, until you get to a point when you have to really self-assess and realize, oh, I'm amazing. And I'm not saying I am amazing. I'm also saying you have to realize you're amazing. So very important is for you to actually pat your back and say, I'm doing an amazing job, and recognize your strengths. That self-assessment is not only for areas of development. That's super important, to be honest with yourself, and yeah, celebrate yourself as well. A very, very good point, because I feel like as I've matured in my role, there's also moments when you have to say, okay, curiosity, I will see you on Friday. Right now I have to do X, Y, Z. And I say maturing in my role because it is a very common trait on CEOs to be focused on the next shiny thing, the new AI tool, the new book, the new culture. Well, in my case, the new culture manual, because like we have Netflix's, which is very popular. We have GitHub, but also Duolingo now has this culture manual that I've been like diving into. So sometimes you have to really focus. Now, to answer your actual question, I think, again, self-reflection is so important. And if you want to use also AI, just sort of like, hey, GPT, we say GPT to ChatGPT, my friend and myself, but just like, hey, I'm a chief of staff, I'm in this level. What can I do in this area? What can I do here and there? And always knowing, it's not always knowing that you have areas to work on, in the sense that you're never enough or anything like that. That's not my angle. My angle is more so there's so much more that I still want to learn. So something, for example, that I do want to learn that will require a lot of me is just like the technicalities of our analytics product. That's just a random example. Because the more you know, for example, for a generalist, the more you know in terms of institutional knowledge, that is an investment. Another example, I did AI courses at the beginning when this was still booming to understand just like how does an LLM work and how to properly use the data and things like that. So it's just being very honest with yourself and seeing where are those development areas. And another example, which I was recently talking to Carmen about, like I saw a course, just an online course that says finance for non-finance executives. And I was like, I might need to do that. It's just like finance for dummies, but with a better name. Because finance is just so hard for me. Like I do it, but it's hard. So I can be honest and say, this is hard for me and I can continue to learn. But that is required. Stopping and assessing and thinking, never just going, go, 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 go. You're going to get to those places where you find your curiosity, you find your mission, you find your purpose. And that applies to life and to work. I remember that precisely. I remember, I think it was a town hall or something like that, where Adnan was like starting to speak about the chief of staff role, and the description sounded like when someone's describing a dessert to you and it has all your favorite ingredients. I was just like, yes, yes, big yes. Because in my role supporting a CEO, of course, like I did admin tasks, but I did so much ops and I wanted to do more ops all the time and I wanted to learn everything and I wanted to support all the teams. I was just so fascinated by the work that we were doing. And when I saw what that job description looked like, being introduced to me here at Viva, like a very natural evolution for an EA, I thought like this is what it was meant to do. So I think it's helpful to, whether you feel inclined to a particular role already or not, to kind of look into role job descriptions or work with AI to kind of tell what you like to do, what you enjoy. Some people like to be focused on one function. If you want to be focused on one function, do not be a chief of staff, please. You will be wearing at least a dozen hats, but that's kind of how I felt. It just felt like the perfect description for me. I love working on process improvements. I love investors, not them, but like investor relations. Okay, I love board meetings. They're so insightful. So that's kind of how I got that insight. It just felt like a very natural course of evolution. It's a lot more heavy and a lot more responsibility than I ever thought it was. So, for example, to make that difference very visual, when I was in EA, I could get everything to a certain point. It would hit 5, 6 p.m. That it was my turn to go and hand it over to my CEO and say, I'll see you tomorrow. Whereas as a chief of staff, when you're dealing with crises, you're the one staying up night, right? So that type of thing was a little, we had a little complicated process a few months ago that just required so much of me in terms of time, energy, focus, all of the above. And what I learned from there, like now that I do have to keep a much better balance and prioritize my health while something like that's going on. Because yes, it was not something I was used to. We have our working hours and you're like, okay, executives, go deal with it. Bye-bye, see you tomorrow. And then I was the executive doing that. So that was a little bit different when you're the one, putting out fires on a Sunday, when you're the one being called by investors or emailed like investors, EAs are like, hey, you owe me this, I sent you that. So it's a little bit different when the responsibility and the point of contact is you yourself and me, myself, and I. I think that's like the biggest pivot that I was like, oh, that was not as fun. But again, very important to find the work-life balance and to find joy, purpose. That's why I always go back to that, because otherwise you're going to run out of energy, you're going to burn out. You're going to lose motivation. Motivation is like very sporadic. So it's more like knowing what's your mission, what's your driving energy to keep you going. And of course, creating I like the book, Feel Good Productivity. I love that. I don't like productivity books in general, but that one in particular is very beautiful, because it's about feeling good while you're doing all this stuff. So highly recommended in times of very busyness.